Rain fell heavily outside the Bojansen Optical Astronomy Observatory. The sound of water hitting the dome's metal roof filled the empty hallways. It was nearly midnight, and Dr. Kita Park was the only person still working. Everyone else had gone home hours ago when the storm started. Kita sat in his chair, his eyes fixed on the computer screens in front of him. Coffee cups and empty snack wrappers covered his desk. His white lab coat had a small coffee stain from 3 days ago, but he hadn't noticed it. He was too busy watching the data coming in from the radio telescopes. Just one more hour, he said to himself, rubbing his tired eyes. He had been saying this same thing for the past 4 hours. The observatory director had told him to go home, but Kita couldn't leave. He had a feeling about tonight, even though he couldn't explain why. Lightning flashed outside, lighting up the room through the window. Thunder followed quickly after. The storm was getting stronger, but the observatory's equipment kept working. Kita had helped design the weather protection systems himself. He was proud that even in the worst weather, the instruments kept collecting data. Kita opened his desk drawer and pulled out an old photograph. It showed him as a young boy, standing next to his grandfather. They were both looking up at the stars. His grandfather had given him his first telescope on that night, telling him, "The universe speaks to those who listen carefully enough." Now, 20 years later, Kita was still listening. His colleagues often laughed at him for spending so much time searching for alien signals. They called him the dreamer behind his back. But Kita didn't mind. He remembered how his grandfather had been called the same thing before discovering a new type of star. The rain grew even stronger. Kita walked to the window and watched the water pour down. The observatory's powerful lights cut through the darkness, making the raindrops shine like falling stars. He noticed something odd about the way the rain was falling. Instead of the usual random patterns, it seemed to fall in regular intervals, almost like it was following a rhythm. Kita shook his head. "I've been staring at screens too long," he thought. But when he looked again, the strange pattern was still there. He rushed back to his computer and started redirecting the sensors to analyze the rainfall. His hands moved quickly across the keyboard as he entered commands. The computer began processing the data from the observatory's weather monitors. Numbers and graphs filled the screens. Kita's eyes widened as he looked at the results. "This isn't possible," he whispered. According to the data, the raindrops were falling in a precise mathematical sequence. It wasn't random at all. The pattern repeated every 7 seconds, too regular to be natural. Kita grabbed his phone and called Dr. Hae-Nul Lee, his colleague who specialized in weather patterns. After 4 rings, a sleepy voice answered. "Hae-Nul, I need you to come to the observatory right now," Kita said quickly. "Kita, do you know what time it is?" Hae-Nul sounded annoyed. "The rain. It's not normal. There's a pattern. I need you to verify my readings." "It's just interference from the storm," Hae-Nul said. "Go home and get some sleep." "Please," Kita insisted. "I wouldn't call if it wasn't important." There was a long pause. Finally, Hae-Nul sighed. "Give me 30 minutes." Kita put down his phone and turned back to the screens. He started recording all the data. If he was right about this, it would change everything. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. "The universe speaks to those who listen carefully enough." Outside, the rain continued to fall in its strange, perfect pattern, carrying a message that only Kita had noticed. In the empty observatory, surrounded by humming machines and falling rain, he had finally found what he had been searching for all these years. The universe was speaking, and Kita Park was listening. Hae-Nul arrived at the observatory 30 minutes later, his hair still messy from sleep. He carried an umbrella that had turned inside out from the strong wind. His shoes squeaked on the floor as he walked to Kita's office. "This better be good," Hae-Nul said, taking off his wet coat. He looked tired and slightly annoyed. "Some of us actually like to sleep at night." Kita didn't answer. Instead, he pointed to his computer screens. "Look at this pattern. The rain isn't falling randomly. It's following a sequence. Newell leaned closer to look at the data. His annoyed expression slowly changed to one of confusion. "That's odd," he said, pushing his glasses up his nose. "Show me the raw data." Keita pulled up more graphs and numbers. They showed the same pattern repeating over and over. Every 7 seconds, the raindrops fell in exactly the same sequence. Could it be a problem with the sensors? Newell asked. He sat down and started typing, running his own tests on the equipment. "I checked everything twice," Keita said. "All systems are working perfectly." "This is real, Newell? Something or someone is controlling this rain." Newell shook his head. "That's impossible. Nobody can control rain with this kind of precision. It has to be a natural phenomenon we haven't seen before." Just then, all the screens in the office started blinking. New data poured in as the pattern in the rain changed. Now the drops were falling in a different sequence, but still with perfect timing. "Look," Keita pointed excitedly. "It's changing. This isn't random either. There's a clear mathematical progression." Newell watched in silence as more data filled the screens. After a few minutes, he stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the rain continued to fall in its strange, orderly pattern. "We need to call someone," he said finally. "This is beyond our expertise. We need a cryptographer." Keita was already reaching for his phone. "I know exactly who to call. Dr. Ji-Woo Kim. She's the best cryptographer in the country." "At this hour?" Newell asked. "Trust me, she'll want to see this," Keita said as he dialed the number. While they waited for Ji-Woo to answer, Keita and Newell continued to record the rain's patterns. They noticed that each new sequence seemed to build on the previous one, becoming more complex. "It's like," Newell paused, struggling to find the right words. "It's like the rain is trying to teach us something, starting simple and getting more complicated." Keita remembered his grandfather's telescope, still sitting in the corner of his office. He walked over and picked it up, feeling its familiar weight. Through the eyepiece, he could see the raindrops illuminated by the observatory's lights. Each drop sparkled like a tiny star as it fell in perfect formation. "Maybe," Keita said softly, "this is just the beginning. Maybe there's more to rain than we ever imagined." The phone finally rang, and Ji-Woo's sleepy voice answered. As Keita explained what they had found, the rain outside began to form yet another pattern. This one was even more complex, but still perfectly timed. In the darkness of the observatory, surrounded by blinking screens and the sound of falling rain, 2 scientists watched in amazement as nature itself seemed to break its own rules. Something was trying to communicate with them, using the rain as its messenger. The question was, what was it trying to say? The storm showed no signs of stopping, and neither did the strange patterns. Keita and Newell knew that this night would change their lives forever. They just didn't know how much. Dr. Ji-Woo Kim arrived at the observatory just before dawn. Unlike Newell, she didn't look tired at all. Her eyes were bright with excitement as she carried her laptop into Keita's office. The rain was still falling in its strange patterns outside. "Show me everything," she said, setting up her computer. Ji-Woo had brought special programs she used for breaking codes. She had worked on many difficult puzzles before, but never anything like this. Keita and Newell showed her all the data they had collected. Ji-Woo typed quickly, entering the numbers into her programs. The 3 scientists watched as her computer began analyzing the patterns. "Look at this," Ji-Woo said after a few minutes. She pointed to her screen. "The rain isn't just falling in patterns. It's using a mathematical language." She drew something on a piece of paper. "See these numbers? They're coordinates." "Coordinates?" Newell asked. "You mean like a map?" "No," Ji-Woo said. "Like star coordinates. The rain is giving us directions to somewhere in space." Keita felt his heart beat faster. He had always believed they would find signs of alien life, but he never thought it would happen like this. He looked at the numbers Ji-Woo had written down. "Can you show us where these coordinates point to?" he asked. Jiwoo nodded and opened another program. She typed in the numbers, and a map of the night sky appeared on her screen. A small red dot began blinking on it. "There," she said. "That's where the message is telling us to look. It's a star system about 50 light-years away." Hanul, who had been quiet for a while, suddenly spoke up. "But how is this possible? How can anyone control rain with such precision across such a great distance?" "The real question is why," Jiwoo said. She was still typing, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. "Why use rain to send a message? Why not radio waves or light signals?" Just then, all their computers began beeping at once. The rain pattern had changed again. This time, it was falling even faster, creating more complex sequences. "It's giving us more information," Jiwoo said excitedly. She started recording the new patterns. "These look like instructions." The three scientists worked together as the sky began to grow lighter outside. Jiwoo's programs translated more and more of the message. With each new pattern, they understood more. "This is amazing," Jiwoo said after several hours. "They're not just sending us coordinates. They're teaching us how to communicate back. The rain isn't just the message. It's the key to a whole new way of sending signals through space." Keita walked to the window and looked out at the rain. It was still falling in perfect patterns, each drop part of a complex message from across the stars. He thought about his grandfather again, about how he had always said the universe would speak to those who listened carefully. "We need to tell someone about this," Haenul said. "But who would believe us?" "We have proof," Jiwoo said, pointing to her computer. "Numbers don't lie. These patterns are real, and they're trying to tell us something important." As the sun rose over the observatory, the three scientists knew their lives had changed forever. They had proof that humanity wasn't alone in the universe, and somewhere, 50 light-years away, someone or something was waiting for Earth to answer their message. The rain continued to fall, carrying more secrets with every drop. Keita, Haenul, and Jiwoo had taken the first step toward humanity's greatest discovery. Now they just had to convince the rest of the world to believe them. 1 week after their discovery, Keita stood in front of a large room filled with scientists from around the world. His hands were shaking slightly as he held his notes. The presentation screen behind him showed the rainfall patterns they had recorded. "As you can see," Keita said, pointing to the data, "these patterns cannot be explained by natural weather systems." His voice was steady, even though his heart was racing. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone in the back started laughing. Soon, others joined in. Keita felt his face grow hot, but he stood his ground. "Dr. Park," said one of the senior scientists, "are you suggesting that aliens are controlling our rain? This is a serious scientific conference, not a science fiction meeting." Before Keita could answer, someone stood up in the front row. It was Professor Da-hyun Cho, his old mentor from university. Professor Cho was one of the most respected astronomers in Asia. "I have reviewed Dr. Park's data myself," Professor Cho said in his deep, calm voice. "The patterns are real. They cannot be explained by our current understanding of weather systems." The room grew quiet again. Professor Cho walked to the front and stood next to Keita. He began explaining the mathematical proof that showed the patterns were not random. While they were talking, a young researcher named Yoonji Kang raised her hand. She specialized in atmospheric physics at a different observatory. "I've been tracking similar patterns in my own research," she said. "I thought my equipment was malfunctioning. But after seeing this," she pulled out her tablet and showed her own data. It matched Keita's perfectly. The mood in the room began to change. More scientists came forward with questions. This time, they weren't laughing. They wanted to understand. Jaewoo stepped up next to explain how she had decoded the star coordinates. She showed them the complex mathematical language hidden in the rain patterns. Even the biggest skeptics in the room couldn't deny the precision of her work. "We need to form a research team," Professor Cho announced. This discovery is too important for just one observatory. We need the world's best minds working together. The Global Space Coalition, which had organized the conference, agreed to fund their research. They gave Kita's team access to more advanced equipment and resources. But not everyone was happy about this. Some governments wanted to keep the discovery secret. They were afraid of how people would react to proof of alien life. Others wanted to control the research for their own purposes. "We can't let them stop us," Kita said later that day. He was sitting in Professor Cho's office with Ji Woo, He Newell, and Yoonji. "The whole world needs to know about this." "And they will," Professor Cho said. "But we must be careful. This knowledge will change everything. We need to handle it wisely." Yoonji spoke up. "The patterns are appearing more often now. They're showing up in different parts of the world. We don't have much time to figure out what they mean." Keita looked out the window at the clear sky. He knew another rain would come soon, bringing more messages from across the stars. Their team had grown stronger, but so had the challenges they faced. "Tomorrow," Professor Cho said, "we start the real work. Tonight, get some rest. You'll need it for what's coming." As they left the office, Kita felt both excited and afraid. They had convinced some of the world's top scientists that their discovery was real. But he knew this was just the beginning. Somewhere out there, someone was waiting for humanity's answer. And time was running out. 2 months after the conference, rain patterns appeared in cities across the world. Ji Woo and Yoonji worked in their new laboratory at the Global Space Coalition headquarters, studying data from every continent. "Look at this," Yoonji said, pointing to her screen. "The pattern in Mumbai matches exactly with what we saw in Sydney." She pushed her coffee cup aside to make room for more papers on her desk. Ji Woo nodded, her eyes fixed on her own computer. "And here's the same sequence in Toronto. They're all perfectly synchronized." She had dark circles under her eyes from working long hours, but she didn't want to stop. Kita entered the lab carrying fresh printouts. "The patterns are getting stronger," he said. "More complex. It's like they know we're finally paying attention." Professor Cho joined them, looking serious. "The Chinese team just sent their data. The rain over Beijing is spelling out something new. Something we haven't seen before." They gathered around Ji Woo's computer as she entered the new information. Her special program started analyzing the patterns immediately. "This is different," Ji Woo said softly. "These aren't just coordinates anymore. They're sending us instructions." She typed quickly, running the patterns through her decoding software. Yoonji leaned closer to the screen. "Instructions for what?" "For building something," Ji Woo answered. Numbers and diagrams began appearing on her screen. "They're teaching us how to make a device, something that will let us talk back to them." Hanul, who had been quiet until now, spoke up from his desk in the corner. "How can we be sure this is safe? What if it's a trap?" "The mathematics are pure," Professor Cho said. "These patterns follow the same universal laws we've discovered ourselves. They're speaking to us in the language of science." Just then, all their computers started beeping at once. Rain was falling in new patterns all around the world. The message was getting stronger. "It's beautiful," Yoonji whispered as she watched the data flow across her screen. "They found a way to turn our own weather into a communication system. They must have been watching us for a very long time to understand our atmosphere so well." Keita thought about how far they had come since that first night at the observatory. Now they had teams around the world working together, all trying to understand these messages from the stars. "We're not alone anymore," he said, "and they want to talk to us." Professor Cho placed a hand on Keita's shoulder. "The world's governments are fighting over who should control this discovery. But the rain falls everywhere. This message is for all of humanity." Ji Woo suddenly sat up straight. "I've decoded more of the instructions," she said. "The device they want us to build. It's like nothing we've ever made before, but all the parts are things we can create with our current technology." "How long would it take to build it?" Kita asked. "With the right team and resources," Ji Woo calculated, maybe 3 months. The real challenge will be keeping it secret from those who want to stop us. Outside the lab, rain fell softly against the windows. The same rain was falling in cities and towns across the earth, carrying the same message to everyone who knew how to listen. Time was passing quickly, and somewhere among the stars, someone was waiting for humanity's answer. The Global Space Coalition built a special laboratory deep in the mountains. Here, Kitai and his team worked day and night to build the communication device. The instructions from the rain had shown them exactly what to do. Professor Cho supervised the construction while studying more of the rain patterns. He discovered something remarkable about their visitors, whom they now call the Rainmakers. These beings have been watching Earth for centuries, Professor Cho explained during a team meeting. He showed them old weather records from around the world. Look at these rainfall patterns from 50 years ago. They were trying to talk to us even then. We just weren't ready to understand. Keita looked at the old records with wonder. All this time, they were patient, waiting for us to notice them. The device they were building looked simple from the outside. It was a tall silver tower with special sensors that could detect the smallest changes in water particles in the air. Inside, it held complex machinery that could create its own rain patterns. It's like learning a new language, Ji-woo said as she programmed the device's computers. They're teaching us how to speak using water itself. Yoon-ji worked on the atmospheric controls. Her knowledge of weather patterns helped them understand how the rainmakers controlled the rain so precisely. They must have incredible technology, she said, to manipulate weather across such vast distances of space. Hanul, who had once been so skeptical, now helped build the device's outer structure. I still can't quite believe this is real, he admitted, but the science is perfect. Every calculation, every pattern, it all makes sense. One day, while they were testing the device's sensors, something unexpected happened. The rain outside started falling in a new pattern, one they had never seen before. Quick, record this, Kita called out. Everyone rushed to their computers. Ji-woo's programs translated the message faster now. They're saying they're glad we're making progress. They can see what we're building. They're watching us right now. Haenul asked, looking up at the rain through the laboratory's glass roof. They've always been watching, Professor Cho said quietly, through every raindrop that falls on Earth. The team worked even harder after that. They knew they weren't just building a machine. They were building humanity's first bridge to another civilization. Other countries were trying to build their own devices, but Kita's team was ahead of them all. As they worked, they learned more about the Rainmakers. These beings had mastered the science of water in ways humans had never imagined. They could travel through space using water particles, turning rain itself into a path between stars. Think about it, Professor Cho said one evening as they watched the rain fall outside. Every drop of rain that has ever fallen on Earth might have carried a message. Every storm might have been trying to tell us something. The device was almost finished now. Its silver tower rose high above the laboratory, reaching toward the sky like a hand reaching out to the stars. Soon, they would turn it on and try to send their first message back to the Rainmakers. Keita stood at the window, watching the rain fall. He thought about that first night at the observatory when he had noticed the strange pattern. He had no idea then that he was seeing humanity's first step toward meeting its cosmic neighbors. The day of the first communication attempt arrived. Dark clouds gathered above the laboratory, but this was no natural storm. Weather satellites showed similar clouds forming over every major city on Earth. Kita stood next to the silver communication tower, checking the final settings. Ji-woo sat at the main computer, her fingers moving quickly across the keyboard. Yoon-ji monitored the atmospheric readings, while Haenul watched the weather patterns on large screens. All systems are ready, Ji-woo announced. Her voice was steady, but her hands trembled slightly. Professor Cho looked at each team member before speaking. Today, we make history. Today, humanity answers the stars. They had practiced this moment many times. The device would create its own rain pattern, sending a message back to the rainmakers. They chose to send something simple, mathematical equations that proved they understood the patterns. "Starting the sequence now," Kita said. He pressed the main control panel, and the tower began to hum. Above them, the clouds responded immediately. The rain began to fall, but not in the usual way. It fell in perfect circles around the tower, each drop exactly where it should be. "It's working," Yoonji whispered, watching her instruments. "The patterns are forming correctly." Suddenly, all their screens lit up with new data. The rainmakers were responding. The rain changed its pattern, falling faster now, carrying a clear message. Ji Woo's translation program worked quickly. They say hello." Her voice shook with excitement. "They're happy we finally answered." More messages came through the rain. The rainmakers explained who they were, a civilization that had evolved in the oceans of a distant world. They had learned to travel through space by using water itself, turning raindrops into pathways between stars. "They chose Earth because of our oceans," Professor Cho said, reading the messages. "They saw that we were a world rich with water, like their home." The rainmakers shared images through the rain, pictures formed by falling drops that showed their world. They lived in great cities under vast oceans, using water for everything: travel, communication, energy. "They want to teach us," Kita said, amazed by what he was seeing. "They want to show us how to use water in ways we never imagined." Hanul, who had once doubted everything about this project, stood speechless as he watched the rain form moving pictures in the air. The rainmakers were showing them their history, their science, their way of life. "Look at this," Yoonji called out. The rain was forming new patterns, showing plans for advanced technology. "They're teaching us how to clean our oceans, how to prevent floods, how to make clean water for everyone." Professor Cho smiled. "They didn't come to conquer or to take our resources. They came to help us grow." The communication continued for hours. News spread quickly around the world as other teams reported seeing the same messages in the rain. Humanity was no longer alone, and their new friends had come with gifts of knowledge and hope. Kita thought about that first night in the observatory, when he had noticed something strange in the rain. Now he understood why his grandfather had always told him to listen carefully to the universe. The greatest messages sometimes came in the simplest things, like raindrops falling from the sky. 1 year had passed since the first contact with the rainmakers. Kita sat in his old office at the Bohyansen Observatory, watching a gentle rain fall outside his window. This rain was natural, but he smiled knowing that somewhere in its patterns, the rainmakers might be watching. The world had changed dramatically since that first stormy night. The rainmakers had shared their knowledge generously, teaching humanity how to use water in remarkable ways. Cities now had perfect systems for cleaning their water. Deserts were blooming as people learned to pull water from the air itself. No one went thirsty anymore. Professor Cho walked into the office, carrying 2 cups of tea. He looked younger somehow, energized by all they had learned in the past year. "The new students are waiting in the lecture hall," he said. "They're eager to hear about your discovery." Kita nodded. He now taught a special class about communication with the rainmakers. Young scientists came from all over the world to learn the language of the rain. "Sometimes I still can't believe it all started here," Kita said, touching his grandfather's old telescope on his desk. "In this observatory, on a night when everyone else had gone home. The best discoveries often come when we keep looking after others have given up," Professor Cho replied with a smile. Ji-woo and Yoonji had gone on to lead the Global Water Technology Center, where they worked with the rainmakers to develop new ways of using water. Hae-Newell now ran a network of communication towers around the world, keeping Earth in constant contact with their new friends among the stars. The rainmakers had explained why they chose rain as their messenger. Water, they said, was the universe's perfect communication tool. It could take any form, flow anywhere, and carry information across vast distances. Every raindrop was like a tiny spaceship, carrying messages through the cosmos. Kita walked to his classroom, passing walls covered with pictures of water-powered vehicles and floating cities, all things that had seemed impossible just a year ago. His students were already taking notes as he entered. Today, he began, I want to tell you about a rainy night that changed everything. But first, I want you to understand something important. He paused, looking at their eager faces. The universe is always speaking to us, sometimes in the grandest things, like exploding stars, and sometimes in the simplest things, like rain falling on a quiet night. Outside the classroom windows, the rain continued to fall. Some drops carried messages from across the stars, while others were just rain. But now everyone knew that even the simplest raindrop could hold incredible secrets. That evening, as Kita prepared to go home, he found a message from the Rainmakers. They had detected a new civilization, one that spoke through patterns of light. They wanted Earth's help to make contact. Kita smiled as he read the message. Humanity had not only found its place among the stars, they had become teachers themselves, helping others do the same. All because one person had stayed late at work, paying attention when the rain began to speak. As he left the observatory, Kita looked up at the cloudy sky. The rain fell softly around him, each drop a reminder that the greatest discoveries often come not from looking up at the stars, but from paying attention to the simple wonders right in front of us.